Hey everyone, welcome back to 7 Billion Geniuses, and I'm going to do a part 2 on world change because I want to do some defining. I want you to understand what I mean by culture. I talk about it a lot in these videos, and for me, culture is not something that's tangible, something you can hang on to. Culture is something that's really carried around by all of us because ultimately it's kind of a set of rules that we have, and whether we acknowledge them or are tangibly aware of them very much is a question. And so part of the process, the 7 Billion Geniuses process, is an invitation to kind of awaken ourselves to these choices that we make based on these sort of rules that we carry around. Rules like how quickly you can respond to a text, or how quickly you should respond to a text, what you should text, what different things mean, and in the context of texting. And these things are rules that aren't really written down anywhere that I'm aware of, certainly weren't intentionally developed really by anybody. They kind of evolve over time based on a previous set of rules and a previous set of rules that have kind of come down to us through our parents and our friends and the people around us in ways that aren't intentional and that we're not particularly aware of. But what they ultimately do is they define what's okay, what's not okay, how things should be, how they shouldn't be, a lot of should kind of stuff, who I should be, how I should act, what I should think, what should be important to me. And so that's what I mean when I talk about culture, is kind of an unspecified set of rules and ideas that kind of determine shoulds for us in our lives. And the 7 Billion Geniuses very much kind of stands up against that, basically, to begin with simply the notion of what a genius is. And I want to use an example to try to explain what I mean more clearly. So what I have right here is an apple. Now, this apple was grown by a friend of mine right down the road, and was picked actually 2 years ago and has been frozen since then. And so as an apple, you look at it and not sure what you think about it. But what I'm proposing is that there are some things that we think about the foods that we eat that are based on these cultural sort of ideas. What an apple should look like, what an apple should taste like, where an apple should come from, how an apple should be grown. And these aren't things that are necessarily based on my preferences. And so the 7 Billion Geniuses process essentially takes one from those ideas, the ideas that describe how an apple should be, that don't necessarily come from me or anybody else that I'm aware of specifically and directly, and move us to, what do I want from an apple? What am I looking for specifically when I think about an apple and whether or not an apple is right for me? So the reason why this particular apple is so right for me is because I know where it came from, I know how it was grown, I've tasted many of them and love the way that they taste. But if you look at this apple, you'll see, it's not, in terms of the grocery store apple, this ain't no grocery store apple. It's too small, it's kind of wrinkly, it's not particularly red. It doesn't really have, this strain of apples doesn't really have a particular color. It's not that it's a green apple or a red apple. And I'm not even sure how old this particular variety of apples is, but it could be a very old variety. Most of the older varieties of apples were small and kind of bitter. But my point is that this apple was selected by me because of what I want from an apple, instead of what an apple is supposed to be. So anybody could take up that particular idea in the context of themselves. How am I being in the context of how I want to be, as opposed to how am I being in the context of these kind of amorphous ideas that float around in our culture and sort of dictate who we're supposed to be. And we can take that up, those ideas up in the context of anything that you want to take up. That relating it back or taking back the power to say, my preferences are this. This is what I want from a relationship or an apple or myself, and how am I meeting those expectations or not? And so moving from a kind of an idea that's an objective idea that comes from somewhere else to us, and making it more specific to our own selves and our preferences, and what our hopes and our dreams and our desires, and realizing that's something that we can do simply by the questions that we ask. So in other words, instead of saying, this is an apple that is somehow wrong, I would say, is this an apple that's something that I would want? Is this an apple that somehow meets some kind of set of criteria that I've made for myself about what I want from an apple? Does this apple taste good to me? Does this apple look interesting to me? As opposed to, this isn't the way an apple is supposed to be based on some set of criteria that I'm not really even sure where they came from. So something to think about, and that very thinking can change our world. Imagine how many different sorts of apples would then be okay if all of us took up the practice of defining what a good apple was and what a good apple wasn't, for ourselves, for our families, for the people that we care about. That's a change, and that's not the way the world is today, but that is certainly the way the world could be without really making much of a shift except for the way that we think and the questions that we ask. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Again, 7 Billion Geniuses is a book that I can send you. All you have to do is ask for it in the comments section or message me through Facebook. Also, my contact information is at the end of the video. So do stay in touch, and thanks for watching.